Today we're going to be making a pastry tart crust or a short crust. It's very similar to a pie crust, except it is a lot sweeter. And the best part about this recipe is that we're going to be using our sourdough discard. Now, these are very delicious, and the flavor combinations that you can put inside of a tart shell are endless. So let's get started on this recipe. To make this tart, the first thing we're going to do is whip up some butter. I have 100 grams of unsalted butter here. I'm going to dump this into a mixing bowl and use my mixer to just whip this up a little bit. Now, the next thing I need is 72 grams of powdered sugar. We're going to use powdered sugar instead of granulated sugar because powdered sugar is much smoother, which is more beneficial when you're making a tart shell. And let's cream this together a little bit. Try not to make a mess like I just said. And then the next thing we need is 20 grams of almond flour. Now, almond flour is really clumpy, and so it's important to sift this before you put it into your mixing bowl. Look at that, perfect. And 30 grams of cornstarch. For the star of the show, we have our sourdough discard. We're going to add in 50 grams of sourdough discard. And 1 gram of salt. Let's also add in 1 egg yolk. And let's give this a little mix. Now, the last ingredient we need is cake flour. If you don't have cake flour at home, you can make it. I actually have a video where I talk about how you can make this with just all-purpose flour or bread flour and cornstarch. So if you don't have any, you don't have to go buy some. You can probably make it at home with ingredients you have already. We need 145 grams of this. Perfect. Now, we want to mix this a little bit with our hand mixer, but not all the way. We want it to be kind of clumpy. It should look like this once it's ready to be dumped out. Now, we're going to dump this out. And we're going to use a dough scraper. If you don't have a dough scraper and you have a bench scraper, that works just as well. We're actually going to mix this. Instead of using a hand mixer to finish the mixing, we're going to scrape this. This really helps integrate all of the ingredients together, and it's something that a hand mixer can't quite do as well. And you can see I'm just kind of taking my dough scraper and brushing it against the cutting board, and it does a great job of mixing all the ingredients together. You can also use your hand to do this, the palm of your hand, by going like this, but it's a lot messier. And with this dough, the warmer it gets, the harder it is to work with. So I prefer to use a dough scraper. Another way you can do this is just by getting it all clumped together once you've done your first kind of rough mix with the dough scraper, and then taking a little bit and bringing it to the side and mixing it that way. And I would do this 2 or 3 times just until you feel confident that everything is very homogeneously mixed together. All right, so I feel pretty good that this is mixed together well. I'm just going to make sure I get all of the dough that's been hanging out on the sides here, and just kind of loosely pack this together into a square. Now we need to let this rest in the fridge for about 1 hour. I'm going to use this plastic wrap to cover the dough. If you don't want to use plastic wrap, that's okay. You can use Tupperware. You just want something to keep it airtight while it's resting in the fridge. And you should let this rest for approximately 1 to 2 hours. We want this dough to be chilled out for when we're working with it, to put it into our tart pan. It just makes it so much easier to work with. Our dough has now had a chance to rest in the fridge for about an hour and get nice and cool. Like I said, it's a really tough dough to work with if it's warm. I wanted to talk about a couple things you're going to need for this next part. The first one is a tart pan, obviously. This is a tart pan, not a tart ring. This is 9 inches across, and the dough that we have here will cover this and more. Alternatively, you could use smaller tart rings or tart pans. This dough, there's enough to make at least 4 or 5 of these smaller ones, maybe even more. An important thing to have when you're making tart crust is pie weights. Now, these help keep the dough from expanding too much while it's baking, which is very important. If you don't have pie weights, there are alternatives that you can use that you probably have in your home kitchen, like some dried beans or rice. We are going to make a circle with our parchment paper to hold those pie weights or whatever you're using in the tart pan. So that does bring me to the next thing we need, parchment paper. This is really key for when you're rolling out your tart crust. It's super helpful if you have a piece of parchment paper on the bottom and then one on the top, especially once this dough starts to warm up a little bit from us working with it. It's pretty soft and sticky, and so it can be kind of tricky on your rolling pin. And all I'm doing is pushing down and rolling it out. Okay. Now with a butter knife, I'm going to just trace around this, and I would say leave about an inch of room around the circle. Does not have to be a perfect circle. There's going to be a lot of leftover dough. We just want to give ourselves enough to work with. And we're going to set this to the side because we can reuse that. You know, if you want to make a big tart crust and then a couple little ones, that'd be great for that. And I'm going to pop this up very carefully. And the next thing we want to do is grease our pan. To grease the pan, I'm just taking a little bit of butter with my fingers and working it around the tart pan. This is the very tricky part, and this is where a lot of people fail. This dough, while it was nice and hard and cold when we took it out of the fridge, it's already softened up quite a bit. You want to be super careful when you're lifting this up because it is very delicate. And all you want to do is just lay it out over the top of the tart pan. And you can see there's a little hole right there. That's okay. We can fix that. And what we want to do is just with our fingers, lift up the sides and kind of don't push with a lot of pressure, but just very gently fold that in to the indentations of the tart ring. And because this is so soft, you can take your fingers and repair that little hole there. Make sure it's all the way along the edges of the bottom. Now, what I usually do is I'll take my rolling pin. My rolling pin isn't big enough to go over the whole thing, but I'll go over the edges. And you can see it's cutting the dough along the edge. And that will allow me to just grab it and throw it into my extra pile there. Now that we have this out, we're going to take one of our pieces of parchment paper and we're going to cut a circle. So about that size. Now we're going to set this aside and we want to preheat our oven to 345 degrees. We're going to want to put this back in the fridge for about 20 to 30 minutes so that this can harden up a little bit and cool down. Also, a quick note, as you saw on this tart pan, the bottom is removable on this one. And if you have a similar setup, you want to be very careful when you're transporting this, not to push up on the bottom because that will lift the crust. Now our oven has had a chance to preheat to 345 degrees. Our tart has chilled for about 20 minutes. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this fork and put a bunch of holes on the bottom of the tart. And when you're using a tart pan, this is a key step because this will really help the dough to not expand when it's baking, in addition to the pie weights we're going to use. And then we'll take our circular parchment paper that we made in the previous step, and I'm going to gently dump my pie weights in there. And just spread those around a little bit. These are a very handy tool to have in your kitchen if you're someone that likes to make tarts or pies. These things are clutch. We're going to bake this for 10 minutes at 345, and then we're going to take it out of the oven and remove the pie weights, which is a little bit tricky, and then bake it for 5 to 10 more minutes. What I really recommend is putting your tart pan on a baking sheet. This makes that step so much easier when you have to take this out of the oven versus having to grab the sides of a tart pan that's super hot. So having it on a baking sheet can be really helpful. So let's bake this for 10 minutes and then take these out. Our tart has been baking approximately 10 minutes now. I need to take these pie weights out and finish the bake. This is the tricky part. You really want to be careful. I like to use a bowl to put the pie weights in while they cool down before I put them back in their holder. And you want to be very careful not to accidentally pull off some of your tart crust. Now, what I do is I usually go around and just gently lift to make sure nothing's stuck. If there's any resistance, I gently pull it away. Now, the trick here is to pull the parchment paper like this so that all of the pie weights or whatever you're using, go to the center of the parchment paper, and it's easier to lift up. And I'm just going to transfer them to this bowl. Now I'm going to finish this off in the oven for about 5 to 10 minutes. And I say 5 to 10 because everyone's oven is a little different. Ultimately, what we're looking for here is this to be a nice golden brown. So let's finish that off. So it's finally finished baking. We've taken it out of the oven. I've let this cool for about 20 or 30 minutes for the tart crust to settle and for the tart pan to cool down so that I can handle it. If your tart pan is like mine, remember that bottom was removable. And so what you do if you want to remove it from the tart pan is you just push up on the bottom. And here you go. I'm going to switch hands. So here it is. It's looking pretty good. The flavor combination for these shells are endless. You may have noticed on my YouTube channel that in some of my YouTube shorts, I created a tart with a layer of almond cream, caramel, and chocolate ganache with a bunch of chocolate, white and dark chocolate, and raspberries on top, as well as a almond cream and raspberry confit and kiwi and other assorted fruits on top. So the flavor combination for these are endless. A piece of advice for you that I have is if you're going to be using something like almond cream, to take this out of the oven at least 2 or 3 minutes early and add that almond cream and then bake it through. This can survive in the oven for another 15 minutes for the almond cream, but you don't want it to be in there for too long. So give it time. And then another recommendation I would make is that you don't take it out of the tart pan like I did here until you've got everything in there that you want. So once it's completely finished, then lift it up from the tart pan. That just makes it a lot easier in my experience. So this was a lot of fun to make. I had a great time. I love making pastries. They are very delicate though. And with this particular recipe, the dough can be very hard to work with, especially if it gets too warm. So you want to keep that in mind, especially if you don't have a cool house. If it's very hot, then make sure you're accounting for that. Maybe instead of letting it sit in the fridge for 20 to 30 minutes, you put it in the freezer for 10. That can sometimes help. And let me know in the comments how this went for you. I'd love to get some feedback on how this recipe went and any successes or troubles you ran into that I might be able to help with. So happy baking, everyone. Thanks for watching.